I used to think loyalty was everything in the workplace, that if you gave a company your time, your energy, your nights, and your weekends somehow, it would come back to you. I was wrong. My name is Natalie Choi. I am 37 years old, born and raised in Sacramento, now working as a senior systems architect at HJ Infotech's Los Angeles branch. I have been with the company for over 12 years, and in that time, I have built tools and systems so precise they became the backbone of our entire West Coast infrastructure. But none of that mattered when Connor Blake, my manager, smiled and said, "Hey Natalie, this is Emily. She's here to shadow you." She looked harmless enough. 24, fresh out of Stanford, with a bright grin and the kind of confidence that only comes from never having your ideas shot down in a boardroom. Emily Rhee. She wore crisp blazers and asked all the right questions. But from the moment I shook her hand, something felt off. There was a hesitation behind her eyes, like she already knew what I was going to say before I said it, like she had been briefed. I told myself not to be paranoid, that maybe she was just really well prepared. But then she started navigating my custom-built tools like she had used them before. Not like a newbie poking around, but like someone revisiting something familiar. Connor, of course, played it cool. He pulled me aside and said it was time to get some of that tribal knowledge out of your head, Natalie. I laughed along at first until he added, just in case you ever decide to take a vacation. God knows it has been, 5 years? He said it like a joke, but his eyes did not smile. That was the first crack. The second came when Emily asked me about the naming convention I used for our hybrid cloud templates. Templates I had never shared outside our private admin group. She phrased it like a question, but she already knew the answer. That is when it hit me. This was not a mentorship. It was a handover. I began noticing small things that most people would miss. Connor hovering over her terminal during our pair programming sessions, pretending to be casual. Emily's credentials quietly gaining new layers of access, levels even our senior developers did not have. Then one afternoon, I walked past the war room and saw the two of them in deep conversation, pointing at a deployment diagram I created from scratch 6 years ago. I stepped back before they saw me. I took a picture with my phone, not because I needed proof just yet, but because I knew this would not end with a simple thank you for your service. They underestimated me. That was their first mistake. See, people like Connor look at women like me, quiet, detail-obsessed, not the kind to scream in meetings, and they assume we are pushovers. What they do not realize is that staying quiet is a strategy. Listening is power. And revenge, when done right, is quiet, methodical, and best served when they least expect it. I was not angry yet, but I was watching. Every line of code Emily touched, every server she spun up, every admin permission Connor approved, I documented it all. Still, I kept playing my role, the mentor, the guide, the patient, helpful, seasoned employee who just wants to help the team grow. I answered her questions with a smile and nodded politely when Connor called me one of the old guards. But under the surface, I was already planning my next move. They thought I was still the loyal company woman too tired or too grateful to fight back. What they did not know was that I had been through worse, much worse. And when you grow up the daughter of immigrants who sacrificed everything so you could build something of your own, you do not just roll over when someone tries to steal it from you. By the end of Emily's second week, I was certain. She had access to our production environment. She had been given my credentials, ones I never approved. Connor told me it was a glitch in the system. I just nodded, walked back to my desk, and stared at my monitor. It was not just a betrayal, it was a setup. They were not waiting for me to leave. They were planning to push me out, discredit my work, and hand everything I built over to someone who had not even earned her ID badge. That night, as I locked up the office and stepped into the quiet LA air, I told myself this: if they want a replacement, they are going to have to do it without stealing my legacy. I smiled to myself for the first time in days. because they just triggered a side of me no one at that company had ever seen before, and now I was ready. At first, I thought I was just imagining it, that maybe I was reading too much into things, letting suspicion cloud my judgment. But the more I watched, the clearer it became. This was not about training. This was about replacement. I started paying attention, not just to Emily's work, but to the way Connor hovered behind us during our sessions. He would lean in too closely, arms folded, pretending to listen while his eyes scanned every line of code she typed. "Just making sure she's learning the ropes," he would say with that smirking tone of his, like everything was just a game. But I was not laughing, because Emily was not learning she already knew. She knew our deployment structure like someone who had studied it. She skipped over basic architecture questions that a true trainee would have asked. She bypassed read-only dashboards and went straight to build scripts that only our senior team even knew existed. She was not following instructions, she was testing boundaries. And when Connor asked if I would be okay with giving her elevated access just for training purposes, I paused. Not because I was unsure, but because I needed to see what they would do next. I approved a limited access profile, then immediately tagged it in the back end with trace monitoring. What I found shocked me. Within 48 hours, there were a dozen access attempts beyond the permissions I had granted. Requests that led directly to production environments, configuration backups, and user credential templates. But what really set off the alarm? Every single one of those requests was logged under my user ID. At first, I thought it was a logging error. Then I checked the metadata timestamps aligned with hours when Emily and I were in sessions together, while Connor just happened to be nearby. That was no coincidence. That was deliberate. I did not say a word. Not yet. Instead, I started documenting everything. Screenshots, session logs, command line activity. I even wrote a script to ping me in real time if any credential associated with my ID accessed unauthorized zones. They thought I would be too busy mentoring to notice, too comfortable in my senior role to question anything. But what they failed to understand is that architects are builders by nature, and I had spent over a decade building a system that could spot a lie faster than any audit team ever could. Every morning I played the part. I greeted Emily with a smile, brought my own coffee, and even joked about the good old days when I was the new one. But behind the scenes, I was mapping every move they made. I watched how Emily's questions became more specific, how she started asking about access rotation policies, or how rollback permissions were handled during emergency updates. Those were not questions a trainee asked. Those were the kinds of things someone asked right before they took over your job and locked you out of it. Connor, on the other hand, was getting bolder. He would pop into our sessions with fake surprise like, "Oh, hey, are we running through the load balancer scripts today?" pretending he just happened to walk by at that exact moment. Or he would throw Emily into real-time diagnostics and say, "This'll be a good stress test for her, let's see how she handles it." It was not mentoring, it was vetting. A quiet audition, and I was the one they were using as the script. The tipping point came when I caught a change in the deployment script I had written for our core update scheduler. It was a tiny edit, just a renamed variable, but it created a fault path that would skip the checksum verification, something only a careless or unqualified person would do. And yet, when I traced the commit, it was again tagged under my profile. That was the moment I knew this was more than just replacement. They were setting me up to fail, or worse, to take the fall if anything broke. But I kept calm, kept quiet, because now I had more than suspicion. I had data, and data does not lie. It tells a story, timestamp by timestamp, action by action. I had no intention of confronting them yet. Let them keep digging. Let them keep assuming I was clueless. What they did not know was that I was already building a file that would speak louder than any accusation. And when the time came, I would not just defend my work, I would expose every lie they had told along the way. It was supposed to be just another corporate lunch, the kind where everyone wears fake smiles and repeats buzzwords like synergy and future forward. We were hosting Mr. Jae-min Hwang, the executive liaison from our Seoul office, and Connor had been buzzing about it for days. He wanted to make a good impression. "Be sharp," he warned that morning, straightening his collar in the hallway mirror. "Mr. Hwang's a big deal. Let's show him we're the real backbone of HJ Infotech." I just nodded, trying not to roll my eyes. I had seen enough of these dog and pony shows to know how they usually played out forced laughter, empty compliments, and managers taking credit for other people's work. We sat at a long private table in a sleek restaurant downtown, the kind with minimalist lighting and sushi served like artwork. Connor positioned himself right next to Mr. Hwang, and I found myself across from Emily, with Connor wedged between us like a proud father introducing his two brightest children. I mostly stayed quiet, offering the occasional insight when asked about our architecture updates. Emily chimed in eagerly, and I noticed how Connor made sure to redirect the conversation toward her, praising her quick adaptability and strong instincts. I sipped my tea and let them play their game, but I did not miss the look Mr. Hwang gave me, sharp, observant, like he knew something was off. Then it happened, the moment that changed everything. Dessert had just been cleared when Connor leaned over to Emily and said something in Korean. He chuckled mid-sentence, assuming no one else at the table would understand. His voice was just loud enough for me to catch every syllable. "Natalie's a relic. She'll be gone by Q4. It was not even said with malice, just casual dismissal, like a passing thought. Like I was an outdated piece of furniture about to be hauled out of the office. I froze for a half second, then reached calmly for my water. He did not know I was born in Busan. He did not know I grew up in a household where Korean was my first language. He had no clue I had understood every smug, thoughtless word. Emily let out a small laugh, one of those nervous giggles you use when you are unsure if a joke is supposed to be funny or not. I smiled, not the kind of smile you give when you are amused, but the kind you wear when something inside you finally clicks into place, the kind of smile that hides the fire burning just beneath the surface. I said nothing for the rest of the lunch, just nodded along, offered polite remarks, and let Connor keep digging his own grave with every arrogant comment he made. When Mr. Hwang stood to leave, he shook my hand a second longer than necessary. His eyes searched mine, and I gave him a respectful nod. I think, in that brief moment, he understood that I had heard everything too. Back at the office, I went straight to my desk and opened my secure logs. I was done waiting. Whatever small thread of patience I had left for Connor snapped clean in two during that lunch. This was no longer about corporate restructuring or handing off projects. This was personal. He had mocked my experience, undermined my work, and now he was plotting my exit behind my back in a language he thought I could not understand. That was not just disrespect. That was a declaration. What he failed to realize is that I had been underestimated my entire life. People always see the calm surface and assume there is nothing dangerous beneath it. But I had learned to hide sharp edges behind soft words. I had learned that the best way to watch someone self-destruct is to let them think you are not watching at all. Connor had made one fatal error. He believed he was the smartest person in the room. He never imagined that the person sitting quietly across from him had already begun writing his downfall in silence. From that day forward, I stopped playing nice. I still smiled, still trained Emily, still played the role of the loyal architect. But inside, the clock had started ticking. I was going to make sure that by the time Q4 rolled around, it would not be me walking out of this company. It would be him. And the best part? He would never see it coming until the very moment he lost everything. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was already past the point of doubt. Connor had crossed the line, and I needed evidence, real, undeniable proof. I knew better than to report suspicions without receipts. In corporate America, hearsay gets you labeled emotional. Data gets you listened to. So while most of my coworkers were off sipping wine or going on weekend hikes, I sat in my apartment with my laptop open, system credentials in hand, and a plan. My access level allowed me to view payroll delta logs and vendor contracts across the financial systems. I never abused that privilege, until now. I started with payroll anomalies, tiny discrepancies that the untrained eye would miss. Line items with similar timestamps but different payment accounts. 3 names kept appearing in different departments under the label internal consultants, all authorized by Connor himself. But when I searched the HR directory and cross-referenced their IDs, nothing came up. No onboarding records, no emails, no tax filings. That was the first red flag. Then I noticed the bonus adjustments. Every quarter, Connor had authorized incentive payments that ballooned stealth bonuses, bundled into department expenses, then offset by reductions in other budgets. On paper, it all looked balanced. But when I followed the trail deeper, I found that over $290,000 had been diverted over the last 18 months to people who did not exist. The approvals had been routed through Connor's manager portal, then linked to budget IDs he manually created. Normally, vendor approvals go through procurement. These did not. These were listed as emergency consulting hires for infrastructure optimization, which is ironic because I built that infrastructure and I sure as hell never saw those people once. That told me 2 things. 1, he was stealing from the company, and 2, he was doing it through a system I designed and trusted. That made it personal. I kept digging. The metadata from those transactions referenced internal audit reports that Connor had supposedly cleared for executive review, but the audit notes were generic boilerplate phrases like reviewed and confirmed, see attached documentation. I searched the file paths listed in the audit fields and landed on a shared drive that had supposedly been decommissioned 6 months ago. Most people would assume it was gone, but I knew better. Files do not truly disappear. When you hit delete, they get reflagged, and this drive had been reflagged, not wiped. When I opened the archive, it was like stepping into a vault of secrets. Old compliance reports, masked invoices, shadow contracts, every piece of dirty laundry Connor thought he had buried was right there, time-stamped and intact. One folder in particular was labeled Ops Flex Board and contained backdated memos with fake signatures, including mine. I opened a PDF labeled Q1 Vendor Extension and found a forged version of my approval for a vendor I had never heard of. He had even copied my e-signature from an old budget approval. My jaw tightened. This was not just corruption, it was fraud, and he was using my name to cover it. For a brief moment, I sat back and stared at the screen, trying to process the weight of it all. Part of me felt violated, another part furious, but above all, I felt focused, because now I had what I needed: screenshots, metadata, payment logs, approval chains, forged documents, and the knowledge of exactly where he thought no one would look. I zipped it all into a secure folder, mirrored it to a drive that only I controlled, and set it to auto backup every 12 hours, just in case. I did not confront him. Not yet. That would have given him a chance to cover his tracks or spin the narrative. Instead, I decided to do what he never imagined I would. I started preparing a file. Not for HR, not for legal, not yet, but for someone who would understand the stakes and know how to act on them. And deep down, I already knew who that person was. This was no longer about getting even. It was about making sure the damage stopped here, before Connor could do to someone else what he had tried to do to me. When Connor officially told me to take point on fully onboarding Emily, I smiled and said, "Of course." I think he expected me to push back, to act territorial or threatened. That was his favorite game: manipulate the optics, then act surprised when people fall for the trap. But I had no intention of resisting. I was not going to argue. I was going to teach Emily everything she needed to know. Just not in the way they were expecting. If they were going to play games with my job, then I would play smarter. My way. I built her a dedicated training environment that looked nearly identical to our live system. Same interface, same permissions menus, same login prompts. But behind the scenes, it was a sandbox, no access to real client data, no ability to make changes that actually touched production. Every major server cluster had been renamed with a subtle variation. US East Main became US East Men. It was close enough that she would not question it, but if she tried to deploy anything, it would trigger a specific traceable error, not a crash. Just enough friction to slow her down. Every command she typed was logged. Every click was monitored. To her, it probably felt like she was being empowered, trusted with the real thing. But to me, it was a live experiment. I needed to know what she really understood, and more importantly, who she was reporting back to. I started noticing patterns. She would ask very specific questions about automation scripts that had nothing to do with her current workload, questions that sounded like they were fed to her. Then, hours later, I would see Connor accessing the logs remotely, cross-checking her input. They were watching me, thinking they were subtle. But I had eyes on all of it. The funny part is, Emily was not unintelligent. She picked up concepts quickly and had decent instincts. But she lacked one thing: context. You can hand someone a car and show them how to drive, but unless they understand the terrain, they will always get lost. That is what she did not see. I was not just testing her. I was reshaping the terrain in real time. At one point, I even fed her a deployment script with a mislabeled function, something minor, easily fixed by anyone who actually read through the logic. She ran it without checking. When it failed, she blamed the system. I smiled and told her, "That happens sometimes in dev. Always read the whole thing before launch." She nodded, embarrassed. Lesson learned. For both of us. Connor, on the other hand, was getting impatient. He started sending nudging emails like, "How's Emily progressing?" or "Is she ready to take on more responsibility?" I always replied with something vague but positive. "She's getting there." Solid grasp of fundamentals. It kept him off my back, gave him hope that his little coup was going as planned. All the while, I was mapping their behavior, building a digital trail of everything they touched. Even Emily's keystrokes were logged through a sandbox session I had quietly installed. Completely within protocol, of course, but no one had ever used it quite like this before. What Emily never realized was that I was teaching her how to fail without knowing it. I was giving her tasks that felt challenging, but were hollow, running simulations that taught her bad habits, allowing her to overestimate her control, because eventually, Connor was going to push her to deploy something real. And when he did, the errors she triggered would point straight back to him, not me. I had already disconnected my credentials from the live logs weeks ago. I was a ghost in the system now, quiet, observant, untouchable. I used to believe in mentoring. I used to think that teaching someone new was a way to give back. But this was not mentorship. This was self-defense. They turned my career into a game of survival, and I was simply adapting to the rules they set. If they wanted me to onboard my replacement, then fine. I would, on my terms, carefully, patiently, and with enough breadcrumbs to lead them straight into the consequences they thought they were too smart to face. By the end of that week, Emily was feeling confident. She thought she was ready to fly solo. Connor agreed. He was already plotting the final push, but I had news for both of them. They were not flying. They were walking straight into a trap, and I was the one who built it. In a company like HJ Infotech, going to HR about something this big was useless. They would have looped in legal, who would have looped in Connor, who would have looped in spin. I needed someone above that noise, someone who still had real pull, not just in the Los Angeles office, but with the board in Seoul. That is when I thought of Mina. She used to be chief of staff to Mr. Huang, the global CEO, before she stepped into a board advisory role in Seoul, sharp as glass, the kind of woman who did not waste time on pleasantries. If I was going to bet on anyone understanding the depth of what I was uncovering, it would be her. I did not lead with a scandal. I led with data. I spent an entire Sunday building a dossier, carefully anonymized, stripped of names and locations, but loaded with technical truth access logs showing credential misuse, vendor approval chains that traced back to shadow accounts, bonus authorizations using fraudulent internal IDs, and several internal emails with metadata that had clearly been altered. I even included session timestamps that proved someone had forged compliance reports outside of standard hours, using a local proxy that matched Connor's machine ID. There was no way it was accidental. It was premeditated, and the proof lived in the logs. I attached it all to a secure email sent from a fresh Proton Mail account and addressed it to Mina's consulting address, one I knew she still monitored through the Seoul board's communication channel. The subject line was simple: irregular financial activity, internal systems. I signed it anonymously, just an HJ Infotech insider. Then I waited. Days passed. I kept checking the encryption tracker, read receipts were off, but I could see the message had been opened. Still, nothing came back, not a single word. In the meantime, I kept doing my job. Training Emily, managing updates, and quietly mirroring every log they touched. Connor was getting more confident, even bolder. He started showing up in meetings I was not invited to, talking like he was already leading the division. He made a comment in one stand-up that stuck with me. We're shifting focus to younger, leaner systems thinking. No offense to legacy leadership. The word legacy hung in the air like a dart meant for my forehead. I just smiled and jotted it down. Every petty remark was another line of narrative I could use later, because I was not just gathering data anymore. I was building a story. Then one morning I opened my Proton Mail inbox, and there it was, a reply from Mina, short, bare, but unmistakably deliberate. It read, "I've reviewed your materials. Keep going." That was it. No questions. No introductions, just 3 words that felt like a match being struck. She knew, and that meant she had already started looking deeper on her own. It meant the right eyes were on it now. I was not alone anymore. From that point forward, everything changed. I started packaging the data more aggressively. Every night after work, I added more screenshots, side-by-side comparisons of real versus forged reports, audit trails, IP activity, and backup restore maps. I translated every technical file into a non-technical explanation, assuming that the Seoul board would eventually want a human-readable summary. Every packet I sent to Mina was tighter, sharper, more incriminating. But still, I said nothing directly about Connor. I never mentioned my name, never described his role. I let the evidence speak for itself. I think that was what kept Mina engaged. She was a strategist. She knew that power is not in pointing fingers, it is in revealing a system so rotten that it indicts itself. And she was starting to see that system, the approval anomalies, the forged audit trails, the misdirected bonuses. She replied to 3 more packets over the next 2 weeks, still short, still deliberate. Her second message said, "Make sure the originals are safe." Her third, "Check your sandbox logs for fingerprint collisions." And the fourth simply said, "He's been warned before." That last one hit like a brick. He's been warned before. That meant this was not the first time someone saw smoke, just the first time someone showed up with a fireproof file. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me felt sick. The other part felt ready. Because now, this was more than just revenge. It was accountability. And I had just found the one person in this entire corporation who was willing to help me bring it. ChatGPT John Noy. I spent the next 10 days doing what no audit tool could. I built a human-readable, legally airtight digital timeline. Every mistake Connor made, every folder Emily accessed, every compliance line overwritten with a timestamp that did not match the system clock, it was all in there. I went back 2 years and tracked bonus disbursements against the hiring logs. I found 3 consultants who were paid without ever being entered into the HRIS system. No onboarding forms, no payroll IDs, just invoice payments routed through a shadow vendor account tied to an LLC registered in Nevada. The registered agent, a shell. But the billing email? Belonged to Connor's old fraternity brother. You couldn't make this stuff up. And then there was the memo. That one nearly made me drop my coffee. Buried in a batch of old compliance documents I had archived back in March, I found a newly modified version of one of my templates, almost identical in formatting, but backdated to 2 months before Emily was even hired. It was a forged compliance sign-off, stamped with my name and digital signature, authorizing limited administrative training access to all new hires. But I never wrote that memo, never signed it, never sent it through the internal approval queue. Whoever created it pulled the header from one of my archived files and rewrote the body with carefully vague language. And the worst part? They thought no one would notice because it was buried in a folder I had not touched in over a year. That forged memo was the smoking gun, the thing that proved they were not just unethical, they were deliberate, calculated. I added it to the timeline under a new section labeled False Authorizations. I cross-referenced every access event tied to that forged memo and included the actual timestamp deltas showing when Emily's permissions were elevated under its authority. She was accessing systems reserved for senior engineers, all under a fake compliance flag they thought no one would trace. When I was done compiling, the file was over 200 pages long. Every entry had a timestamp, a description, the associated logs, and a plain English summary. I broke it into categories: vendor fraud, payroll abuse, compliance forgery, unauthorized access, and system misuse. Each category had its own folder, and every folder included both the original files and translated notes, just in case Mina needed to present it to non-technical executives on the Seoul board. I even included metadata snapshots in raw JSON, and for good measure ran them through SHA-256 hash verification, so no one could claim the data had been tampered with. Before I sent the packet, I backed everything up onto an encrypted offline USB drive and put it in a safety deposit box at my credit union in Pasadena. Then I uploaded the files to a secure cloud share and sent Mina the access key with 2-factor authentication. I kept the message short, as always, just full timeline attached, originals preserved, let me know if format needs adjustment. I hit send, logged out, and waited. 2 hours later, Mina responded. Preparing internal review. That was it. No frills, no follow-up, but I could feel it. The clock had started. Those 3 words meant she had everything she needed to present to the executive panel in Seoul. I could picture her in one of those glass-walled boardrooms, laying out each section, pointing to discrepancies, quoting from her screen with that calm but firm tone she was known for. And Connor? He had no idea what was coming. I still saw him strutting around the office, cracking jokes to the junior staff like he was some kind of mentor. He passed by my desk one morning and said, "Hey, Natalie, how's it feel training your own upgrade?" I smiled, nodded, and said, "Feels like a masterclass in patience." He laughed, completely unaware of the fire I had already lit under his feet. Emily stayed quiet most days, but I could tell she sensed the shift. She started asking fewer questions and watching me more closely, like she was trying to understand why I was so calm. But I had no reason to be nervous anymore. The truth was finally moving, and it had a voice louder than mine ever could be. So I just kept documenting. Not because I had to, but because it was who I was. I did not go looking for a fight. But if someone was going to rewrite my legacy in forged memos and false access, they were going to have to face the real story. And I had just handed it indexed and translated to the one woman who could bring it to light. He did it without blinking. Just like that, I was removed from the very project I had spent the last 18 months of my life building Core Sphere Sync. No warning, no explanation. 1 minute, I was the technical lead, and the next, I was shuffled off to a performance alignment review with no real scope or deliverables. Connor sent out a polished executive summary to the Seoul board later that week, naming himself as the project's original architect. His name was all over it. Mine? Nowhere. Not even in the footnotes. I was not even CC'd on the report that detailed my own work. I stared at that summary in disbelief, then slowly closed the email. That was his big move, rewrite history, and hope no one noticed. But Connor forgot one critical detail. He was not a builder. He was a talker. I, on the other hand, had receipts. I still had the original Git commits from the CoreSphere Sync prototype, each one hash-verified and time-stamped with my ID. I had Slack archives with design sprints I led, annotated files in Notion, and buried deep in our documentation platform was a session where I whiteboarded the entire architecture during a late-night brainstorm, screen-recorded and saved, with my voice narrating every step. You cannot fake a digital fingerprint, not when it lives on 6 different mirrored repos and syncs across time-stamped cloud backups. Every time Connor tried to erase me, he left behind a trail of metadata that told the truth. So I did not scream. I did not push back in meetings. I just packaged it all neatly and quietly, sent it to Liam Cortez in internal audit. Liam and I were not exactly friends, but we shared a mutual respect for clean systems and clean code. He once told me, if the logs say it happened, then it happened. I figured he would know what to do with the truth. The folder I sent him was titled CS Sync Authorship Chain. Inside were original Git branches, contributor histories, retro notes, and voice-to-text transcripts from every weekly engineering sync. All of it dated, hashed, and indisputable. I included a summary page at the top, 8 bullet points detailing how Connor was added to the project 6 months after the initial framework was built, and only after it had already cleared its first internal benchmark. I did not embellish. I did not editorialize. I let the files speak for themselves. Liam replied 3 hours later. Received, reviewing silently, sit tight. That was all I needed to hear. Liam knew how to stay under the radar. If he was on it, that meant the version of events Connor sent to the board was now in question. I could picture the moment clearly. Seoul executives flipping through timelines that did not match, asking who actually led the CoreSphere framework, and soon enough they would see my initials, over and over again. Still, Connor kept smiling. He walked around the office like a man who had already won. He gave Emily a pat on the back and called her his fast learner. He even called an all hands and praised the new leadership in our sync strategy. I sat in the back row and took notes not of what he said, but of who applauded, who glanced at me uncomfortably, and who looked genuinely convinced. It is funny what people will pretend not to see when someone powerful tells them to look away. But my time was coming. Mina had already started her internal review. Liam was quietly validating the authorship files. And I was still working, still showing up, still logging every keystroke in a sandbox session that Emily had no idea was watching her real-time decisions. They thought I had been sidelined, pushed to the edge of the company's memory. What they did not realize was that I had never stopped writing the story. They just stopped reading the parts that made them uncomfortable. So I let them play their little victory lap. Let Connor steal my lines and wrap them around his quarterly board pitch. Let him think the Seoul office believed every slide. Because when the truth came out, and it always does, it would not just be about pride. It would be about fraud, about falsified compliance, and about one woman's quiet trail of truth stacked higher than 1,000 empty claims. And I was not done stacking, not even close. They called it an efficiency review, but we all knew better. The invite came late the night before, marked mandatory with no agenda. I showed up early, calm but hyper-aware. Connor stood at the front of the glass-walled conference room, looking like he had rehearsed every word in the mirror. He wore that smug half-smile of someone who believed he was about to solidify his dominance. A few department heads trickled in. Emily, too. She looked down when our eyes met. But what shook the room was not who entered. First, it was who walked in behind Mr. Huang. Mina Kwan, in person. No one knew she was coming. She stepped inside silently, no coat, no bag, just a slim folder in hand. Her expression was unreadable. She took a seat near the corner, not at the board table, but within full view of everyone. And suddenly, Connor's confidence dimmed just a little. He kept going, though opened his deck, clicked through the first few slides about operational efficiency, scaling down redundancies, and redefining project ownership. I knew where this was going. He was laying the groundwork to officially erase me from CoreSphere Sync and restructure the team under his name. But he never got that far. Mr. Huang, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, raised a hand. He did not look at Connor. He looked at me. "Before we proceed," he said in measured tone, "Natalie, would you like to translate the last memo Connor sent to Emily?" The room fell still. Connor's eyes darted toward his laptop, then toward Emily, then back at Mr. Huang. I could feel the weight of every head in that room turning toward me. I gave a small smile, calm, controlled. Then I answered. "Of course." I recited it word for word, in clear, fluent Korean. The memo had been written by Connor just 3 days earlier. He assumed no one here would catch it. But he had sent it to Emily using company channels, and I had seen a copy. It read, "Once she's out, we relabel the build, clean the Git history, and the Seoul office will never know." When I finished, I turned back to Connor, who had gone pale. The silence afterward was so loud it made the hum of the ceiling vent seem deafening. Mr. Huang nodded slowly, then glanced at Mina. She opened her folder and began distributing printed documents, one to each department head, one to Mr. Huang, and one placed directly in front of Connor. "These are falsified access logs, unauthorized vendor payments, backdated compliance records, and documentation of project theft," Mina said coolly, "all compiled by Natalie over the past 3 weeks with validation from internal audit." Connor's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Mr. Huang stood up. "We trusted your leadership," he said quietly. "But what you did was not a mistake. It was deliberate. You attempted to erase someone else's work, redirect company funds, and misrepresent project origins to this board." Emily looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. Connor finally spoke. "She's been sabotaging us. Natalie's been spying, manipulating." I cut him off, not with anger, but precision, my voice calm, unwavering. "I have done nothing in secret. You forgot something, Connor. You left a trail. Every decision you made, every file you touched, every lie you told it is all in the logs. You thought I was just watching, but I was recording." Mina nodded in my direction. Everything Natalie submitted was cross-referenced, hashed, and confirmed. Mr. Huang gestured toward the door, and 2 members of corporate security appeared in the hallway. Connor's face fell. No more slides, no more speeches. He gathered his laptop with trembling hands and said nothing as he was quietly escorted out of the building. The room sat in stunned silence. Mr. Huang looked at me. "You still want CoreSphere Sync?" I took a breath, then nodded. "Yes, but on my terms." He smiled the first time that day. "You'll have full authority, effective immediately." And just like that, the reckoning had come and passed, not with shouting, not with threats, but with truth, timing, and the kind of quiet patience only earned through being underestimated for far too long. I stood up, steady as a mountain. My voice was calm, but every word hit like a bell. Eyes were on me, board members, department leads, Emily, and of course, Connor. I was not angry anymore. I was finished being overlooked, underestimated, and used. So I looked directly at Connor and I recited in flawless Korean the same sentence he had said to Emily during that lunch a few weeks ago, the one he thought no one understood. She is a relic. Let her finish the quarter, then phase her out. I saw his face drop before I even got to the last syllable. The silence afterward was heavier than any applause I have ever earned. Then I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You replaced the wrong person. I speak your language on every level." Connor opened his mouth to spin something, to reframe the situation, to slither out of accountability. But it was too late. Mina had the receipts, literally. She had printed records of every forged compliance file, every payment to ghost vendors, every Slack message where he instructed Emily to reroute credits and erase my presence from the Core Sphere Sync audit trail. He turned to Mr. Huang, desperate now. "She's been planning this for months. She's vindictive. This is a setup." But Mr. Huang remained seated, hands folded, gaze firm. "What you call planning," he said, "we call diligence. What you call vindictive, I call accountable. You chose deception. She chose integrity." Security was already standing by. Not rushed, not dramatic, just quiet professionalism. 2 men stepped into the room, nodded to Connor, and waited. There was no screaming, no outburst. Just the shuffle of his shoes across the polished floor, the soft click of the door, and the collective exhale of a room that had just watched a house of cards collapse. The meeting ended not long after that. People filed out, some silent, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Emily avoided my eyes completely. I did not follow them out. I stayed behind as Mr. Huang and Mina remained seated. He glanced at me, then gestured to the chair across from him. "I have reviewed your designs," he said, "not just for Core Sphere, but your older architecture work. Your process logs are some of the most disciplined I have ever seen." "Thank you," I said simply. "There is an opening," he continued, "Director of Global Systems Architecture. You would report directly to Seoul. That would mean oversight of not just Core Sphere, but 3 other strategic frameworks we are rolling out next fiscal year. Are you ready for that?" I nodded. "Yes, I am." He smiled, not with arrogance, but with that rare, quiet respect that only surfaces when someone realizes they almost missed something truly valuable. "We were wrong to overlook you, Natalie. That will not happen again." 2 weeks later, it was official. New badge, new title, and a seat in the Seoul reporting chain. I did not post about it online. I did not brag. I did not need to. I had the one thing that truly mattered: truth and proof. Not just that I had been wronged, but that I had done something about it without stooping to his level. I built the case, protected my legacy, and turned every trap he set into a data point that buried him. Emily transferred departments quietly. No announcement, no farewell cake. As for Connor, word got around that legal was pursuing restitution, but I never followed up. He was no longer my problem. I still work late sometimes, still double-check logs, still love clean frameworks and airtight security layers, but I also take time now trips, family, quiet mornings, because when you spend so many years being the silent backbone of something, you forget you are allowed to take up space. Now, I lead teams across 3 time zones. People actually ask for my input and wait to hear it. And when they do not, I remind them gently, firmly, that the quiet ones are always listening, always watching. And sometimes, when they are ready, they speak back in your language, and they end it with the last word.